The squirrel was magic! Beware your human heart. This is a Diabolical Index for Monday, April 23rd, 2018, where the pages of the uncanny reside. I'm Corey Dawson, as always, from Paradox City Books and Games in Rising Sun, Indiana. And it's just one of those things. My perfect record has been tarnished. This is my first episode back from my little hiatus. It's been a busy little time. My real job, I guess you could say, has been going through a little bit of a shift. We moved out of this state into another state, so I've been really busy with that and had to take off last time. And this last weekend, I'm just in, actually. It was just last night I got in from the Midwest Action Fest, Logansport, Indiana. And I totally recommend checking out some of the stuff that was there. I recommend The Summoner. It was an awesome, I guess you could say it was like a supernatural action film about a company. I think it's Odin Spectral Solutions or something like that, where there's a guy who gets the call. And I guess, some people might make a lot of Ghostbusters references, but it's so physical that it definitely goes over into the Evil Dead 2 realm. But there was no laughs to be had. It was definitely serious, and there were some feels there. I definitely recommend The Summoner. I hope that he, I think his name's James, the director. I hope that he gets the funding to make it into a full feature. It was a longer short, but check it out, The Summoner. It was wonderful. And also the Theta Girl. Definitely check that out. It's kind of existentialization, whatever, existentialism and exploitation. If you put those two together, that's what they called it. And it's beyond description. So just look up the Theta Girl, Theta. You won't regret it. It's unlike anything you've seen before. But I almost forgot, Sea-tectives, fantastic animated short that was there about a lobster detective and his clam partner. It was a kind of a takeoff of the Sherlock Holmesian type detective stories, but it takes place under the sea, and it was a lot of fun, and there were a lot of jabs at detective fiction and just, I guess, kind of like the rabid fanboy fan base of different things along the lines of pop culture. And so I definitely I recommend checking that out. There were so many that I'm sure I'm forgetting, but Midwest Action Fest inaugural, first annual this year, and just coming off the Midwest Horror Fest, the first annual from last year. They got their work cut out for them. I think they said they had over, I think it was something like over 100 or 190. I can't remember. I think it was closer to 200 submissions for the Midwest Horror Fest this year. So it's going to be something else. It's going to take place over 3 days in October. So definitely keep your eyes peeled for that. And also, I got Andrew and TJ. As Andrew, as always, and TJ is stepping in to help out if the lights on my somewhat craggy face, somewhat craggy. I'm letting, I don't know, it's been coming through. I had to shave it all the way down so I could have my mashup costume for the costume contest, the Action Fest. I was a mashup of Harvey Keitel and Quato from Total Recall, so I was Harvey Quatel. But I had to shave down a little bit, but it's already growing back. I usually have a 5 o'clock shadow at noon, but that's normal. But if the lighting looks good, it's all TJ. But they're in from the cinematic reality. They're filming that about 20 minutes away from here, so they broke off from that and stole some equipment to well, to bring down to Magic Squirrel and give it a little bit of class. But yeah, so that's one thing I want to mention. Also, Deranged Minds Entertainment. Make sure to go there and check out what they've got going for Inverted, their new feature, which, coming off the heels of Red Eye, they're going to have to do a lot to shock people more than they did with Red Eye. But I have a feeling they might know a thing or two about how to do that. But definitely go to Deranged Minds Entertainment and check out their Indiegogo for their feature. And so tonight, I have some births and deaths in literary history. And probably one of the most famous births in April would have to be the Bard himself, the Bard of Avon, William Shakespeare. And when I was looking up just kind of the researching the births and deaths, I realized that William Shakespeare was born and died in the same month, which, I don't know, it doesn't give a whole lot of credence to him actually having existed. There's a lot of rumors about whether or not William Shakespeare was actually a collection of writers and playwrights and philosophers of the time. Christopher, I can't remember his last name right now, but he wrote Dr. Faustus, and his friend Ben Jonson, kind of a playwright, who they always describe Ben Jonson versus William Shakespeare like you kind of have the mad genius who can do everything in just a flash with no sleep, with boundless energy, and then you have the other more studious, scholarly one who is a little bit slower off the draw and gets forgotten by time, and lasts longer than his predecessor. So that's going to bug me. I can't remember his name now. Anyway, but it kind of, I don't know, it kind of lends a little bit of mystery to the whole story of William Shakespeare, as whether or not he existed. It just seems kind of convenient that it was in the same month on both ends. So that's why I didn't mention the death category, because I thought it was a little bit more important to mention that he had been born. Another one on that list who is almost as famous, I'd say, for it's one of those rare occasions where someone is so famous for one work that their name never really goes away, and their other works are kind of lost to time, and that's Robert Bloch, creator of Psycho, and many other fantastic things. He wrote some books on Jack the Ripper and a lot of short stories. He was involved with Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine in a lot of ways. After the success of Psycho, he had actually written 2 more Psycho books, and I'm looking forward to them making a legitimate Psycho movie the way it came out in the book, because believe it or not, the book is more gory than the movie was, and I'd say that Norman Bates looked a lot more like Toby Jones from The Mist, the little cashier guy. I think he was in one of the Captain America. He was in Captain America, the first Captain America, as the little henchman, or not henchman, but the fellow scientist of the Red Skull. But Norman Bates in the book was actually a small, balding, middle-aged man. So when you think of the change, I mean, there's no doubt about it. Anthony Perkins made that role his own, and he was actually almost unable to escape it after it ruined his career as an actor. He had actually been groomed to be a leading man. He had been in some romantic movies and dramas and things like that, and then he picked Psycho and became immortal and basically screwed his career up. He was in Murder in the Orient Express, and he was in Catch-22, but I don't think anyone paid as much attention as in Psycho. But Robert Bloch was also a member of the infamous Lovecraft Circle, where, Lovecraft was incredibly prolific with his correspondence with a group of writers that kind of hung on his every word, and he would write just voluminous piles of mail to them, answering questions and just kind of flushing out ideas and all those types of things. And Robert Bloch was one of the people he corresponded with. And I think he actually did the foreword to my first copy of Blood-Curdling Tales of Horror and the Macabre, the Lovecraft, in my opinion, the finest Lovecraft collection of all. I think I got it when I was like 10 years old, something crazy like that. So I've been on the bandwagon longer than anybody. But the third one that I was going to mention is the infamous Vladimir Nabokov, the writer of Lolita, the shocker of the 50s, with Humbert Humbert, the older man who searches in vain for some sort of way into his young neighbor's life, and the obsession ends up destroying his life and many other lives in that story. And Nabokov did other things, many other things, Pale Fire. But again, just like Robert Bloch, his initial success overshadowed everything that he was going to do after that. I'm sure he was considered a man of letters and had a lot of critical acclaim, but it never quite captured the imagination of the populace like Lolita did, which is a danger when you get too familiar. Then sometimes it becomes safe and you lose your bite. But those are the births in literary history that I collected for today. There are many more Anne McCaffreys in there, but to be honest, I'm not too familiar with Anne McCaffrey past the fact that I know that not everything she did, but a lot of what she did had to do with the riding of dragons. I just don't know enough about it. But the deaths are just as compelling. William Hope Hodgson, which isn't a name that's huge outside of really classic horror fans. William Hope Hodgson was the creator of Carnacki the Ghost Finder, which was one of the most popular, well-known of its time, kind of supernatural detective, kind of a ghost hunter, and mysteries that would surround different supernatural happenings and monsters. He would go after it and solve it in a really laconic way. He wasn't this finder of adventure. A lot of times he would go in and kind of look things over and almost in a Holmesian way just analyze it, take it apart bit by bit, and make everyone realize that it was the safest thing in the world that had happened. But that's definitely one of my favorites. Carnacki kind of rates up there with some of the Dr. Nicola is another one that kind of falls into that same realm. Although Nicola, that was one of the few books of that time where the villain was actually the main piece of the book, much like Dr. Fu Manchu and the Yellow Peril. That it was big at the time. I'm also sure they could get away with it today because there are a lot of horrific Asian stereotypes in those books. But I was a big fan of them when I was a kid. I remember one. So many death traps. I mean, Jigsaw would get a migraine headache just trying to think of all the stuff that Fu Manchu came up with. There was one where a police officer just like walks through a room and he brushes past this gigantic pod sack of some plant, and the spores that come off of it and just like cloud his body, just like eats him to the bone in like a couple of seconds. And this was written in the 10s. I mean, this was before Prohibition that this stuff came out. So I totally recommend checking it out. Sometimes it's difficult to find, but yeah, I'm getting off track. So I was talking about William Hope Hodgson. He died in April. And someone else you may have recognized the name, Bram Stoker, died in April. The creator of, much to Andrew Moore's dismay, Dracula, among other things. Guy's in the midst of all these horror films, and I don't know what to say about it, man. I don't know what to do with you. But yeah, so Bram Stoker famously was kind of heckled, and a lot of people in the know of vampire lore kind of gave him a little bit of flack for picking and choosing things. But I mean, there were some things that had never come to light in literature before he made Dracula, and a lot of people took his kind of letter form, where things would be, the story would go along as part of a journal entry, or a letter from one person to another, or a newspaper clipping, or the report of the Demeter crashing up onto the shore and the wolf jumping off, that type of thing. It was borrowed by many people. In fact, part of it was borrowed by the book that I did a few weeks ago, The Troop. They did a lot of stuff in that, where it was news reports and newspaper clippings and internet chat rooms and things. And Stephen King has borrowed it many, many times, especially most famously for Carrie. Carrie was composed of a lot of that type of thing. And he said before that, Dracula, Bram Stoker was a big influence of his. But to say that Stephen King hasn't been influenced by someone, I mean, it's kind of par for the course now. I'll have more to say about Stephen King a little later, when I talk about one of the authors I'm going through tonight. You can't not talk about him. But Bram Stoker wrote all kinds of things. Actually, he wrote The Lair of the White Worm and the House, or the Jewel of the Seven Stars. That was a really great Egyptian horror story. And there's also kind of a postscript called Dracula's Guest that is somewhere around here. Actually, right here. Bookcam. I do have something to show on Bookcam. Let's see if I can get it on target. There we go. Dracula's Guest. It's actually kind of a postscript. I guess you could say it was a sequel, or it might even be a prequel to the Dracula story. And a lot of publishers kind of took off on the idea once Dracula was such a hit. And, I think in some part it had to do with they made many plays of it, and actually Bela Lugosi started his Dracula fame in a play when he was younger and carried it on into the film. But Bram Stoker died April. I'm not sure what the year was. I try not to spend too much time on the years, just kind of sum it up to the months. But the final death for April, you may have heard of, creator of Poor Richard's Almanac, and the rumored, the fabled, the legendary discoverer of electricity. I don't know. I think that it happened way before then. But Benjamin Franklin, there were so many things to say about Benjamin Franklin. True Renaissance man, total polyglot. I mean, he did it all. He did everything. He was a writer and a philosopher and a scientist and a what they call a deductionist of his time, and apparently a Lothario too. I don't know. He was a diplomat, international diplomat. He famously wanted the turkey to be the national bird of America. I think that's kind of shown up in logic a little more, and even in the past few years, than ever could have had before. If any bird is indicative of the country we live in right now, it would definitely be something that would look up and drown in a rainstorm. But yeah, I mean, there's so many things to say about Benjamin Franklin, but I think that what you could do is read his autobiography. That's a good place to start, or just look at the changes and kind of like the promise that he brought to the early colonial Americans and their culture. But anyway, there you go. The births and deaths for April on the Diabolical Index. As always, I think I go on a little long about those, but it's only because of that I think that I can kind of back off. It's happened again. It seems like the last couple of times that I've chosen the books to talk about, in this case, I've read both of these books before. I thought of one in particular because I never quite got to finish it, but I had read about 3/4 of it, and the other I read straight through the first time I had picked it up, and that was only last year, I believe, when I picked up the second book I'm going to talk about tonight, and I just read it straight through. And what I'm going to do is something I don't normally do, but they're so good, and I think it'll give you an idea of why I may not be saying as much about it as I would, because it's just something that you have to read to believe. But The first one I'm going to talk about tonight is Robert R. McCammon's Gone South. Now, Robert R. McCammon, I said I was going to talk more about Stephen King, and I will definitely in this. Is the photo up? Okay. So as you can see by the cover page, or the cover of Gone South, even by kind of like the curving font of the lettering for the title, you can see that there was something that they were trying to instill in his books that would kind of put him next. Like if you look at Stephen King's books and Dean Koontz' books, you can see that they do the same thing there, where they use their name and the title to frame a scene in the center of the cover. And it was big for a long time, especially in the 80s, to do that. But in this case, I honestly think that Robert R. McCammon was one of the ones that you expected to be kind of remembered in the same breath as Stephen King and Dean Koontz. And actually, with Dean Koontz, I think, in my opinion, I think that Robert R. McCammon should have totally eclipsed Dean Koontz. And to be honest, in my humble opinion, I think that he eclipsed Stephen King a long time ago. It's one of those things where sometimes when you reach the height as Stephen King has, where people start looking at you, you write something as grisly as Cujo under the influence of multiple drugs and alcohol, drinking out of the mouthwash bottle and, taking lines off of a mirror you got at some fair by throwing a ring across a bottle. He doesn't even remember it. And Robert R. McCammon was writing around the same time and just came out with wonderful stuff. And in the especially the characterizations in some of King's stuff seems so stilted to the point where he wants to make it appear so homey and all-American, but you don't necessarily recognize the people that you're supposed to be, seeing in your everyday lives. Whereas Robert McCammon, I recognized everybody in this book. There's no doubt about it. The lead character, Dan Lambert, the disgruntled Vietnam veteran, and even some of the more outlandish figures. I mean, I worked at a casino. I've seen all types, and I definitely felt a kinship with a lot of them in the book, without so much falderall. I don't think that some of the later things. I mean, don't get me wrong, King, and it's a shame. It really is a shame, because I think that the stuff that he did when he was off his head is a lot better than the stuff that he did when he realized what he was doing, and it shows. Like for instance, I thought that Gerald's Game should have been a short story. And Melanie would definitely disagree with me about that. I think she's reading that right now. But I think that at certain points, you start tacking things on, and once you have the name, then you can just keep going. I mean, I saw his newest book, The Outsider. I saw that recognized as the king of horror becoming the kid of the dad novel, which is a terrifying thing to be called. Because, I mean, I think that I know what a dad novel is. My dad wrote, he read a lot of James Michener, and Jennifer's gonna get me for that one. She's been telling me to read James Michener, but like Clive Cussler and things of that ilk, where you see, pops reading it on the beachfront. But I'm digressing all over the place. But basically, I think that Robert McCammon really got shafted. I don't know exactly how it came about, but he never really reached the heights that they had. And this book was one of his later books, and it wasn't as heavy-handed as something like Shawshank Redemption, where you have some entity tearing kids limb from limb, and then all of a sudden we feel for a con that wasn't supposed to be where he was, or in Green Mile, where some gentle giant ends up having the touch of God. So in Robert McCammon's work, I mean, I'm totally blown away that the guy hasn't that movies haven't been made of multiple books of his. Everyone I know that's read Robert McCammon for any length of time has become a writer. There's no doubt about it. Nate Southard, the author of Porcelain, one of the first books I did on this podcast, or on this video, whatever you call it. I don't know what to call it, but you know what I mean. He turned me on to McCammon when we were in school, like even before high school. He was reading Stinger, and he told me about Swan Song, which people who are in the know, they say that it totally smokes The Stand. And there's kind of a question as to whether or not Swan Song was McCammon's answer to The Stand, with the post-apocalyptic type of thing. But he written a couple of things like that, and he made his vampire novel, and he made his werewolf novel, The Wolf's Hour, which is about a werewolf in World War II. I totally recommend The Wolf's Hour to anyone, because when you can read something called The Wolf's Hour and you see a guy in a military fatigues on the front of it, changing before your very eyes into a wolf, and yet somehow it manages not to be goofy. It's a wonderful spy story, and it's got as much adventure and intrigue as you could ever possibly expect from Bourne, and the guy turns into a freaking wolf, for Christ's sake. Read The Wolf's Hour. I can't express it enough. It's such a wonderful romp through Nazi Germany, with a guy getting just as many licks in as Aldo the Apache. I mean, Inglourious Basterds wishes it could be The Wolf's Hour. But anyhow, we're not talking about The Wolf's Hour. I'm just saying that I really feel in my heart that Robert McCammon had, I think that he got the short straw somehow. Somehow there wasn't enough room for him, and he ends up being kind of like this third banana somehow behind Coons, which it just seemed like after a certain period of time, Coons was like a dime a dozen. But anyhow, I did want to read the inner cover of Robert McCammon, I almost said Boy's Life. It says Boy's Life on the back. Gone South. Boy's Life is another one of his that's it's just a wonderful story of a child and growing up, and it's just that thing where, Stand By Me, The Body, the original story for The Body in different seasons, I think that was kind of before the time where he was trying to make everybody like him, which I think kind of happened to him. And, I should have mentioned Peter Straub in there too. But I think that, with that kind of like list of people, but I think that people, when they think of Stephen King, or when they think of Peter Straub, they just have to link Stephen King to him. And maybe that's why The Talisman happened and Black House happened. But he's a wonderful writer too, and I think that sometimes you get darkened by someone else's shadow, and you just can't ever get clear of it. But in this case, I almost think that they had just shut the door in McCammon's face and allowed King and Coons and Straub to walk through. But I don't want to down any of their stuff really, except for King. He pisses me off sometimes. Leesy's story. He says that's his favorite book. No. Maybe that's an elitist view. I don't know. But if he tells me that Leesy's story is better than Thinner, granted, he would say that was Bachman. But Bachman is King. King is Bachman. He released 2 books with practically the same cover, like corresponding covers as both guys. I'm done with that. So, anyhow, I wanted to read this for Gone South. Flooded by memories. Poisoned by the deadly fallout of Agent Orange, and desperate for work, Dan Lambert kills a man in a moment of blind fear and fury. It is an act he cannot excuse. A mistake that will change his life forever. And now Dan is on the run, heading south toward the Louisiana bayous, and on his trail are police officers and bounty hunters, including the most memorable and bizarre team ever paired in modern fiction. Pelvis Isley, an Elvis impersonator of the worst kind, and Flint Murtaugh, a fastidious, ruthless loner and freak show refugee who carries the body of his unformed twin brother on his side. As Dan heads down the swampland in search of his own salvation, he meets a young woman who's on a similar journey. Like Dan, Arden Halliday bears a great burden, a disfiguring purple birthmark that blankets half of her face, wounded by the stares, by the pity and revulsion. She's making her way into the bayous in search of the Bright Girl, a legendary faith healer who rid her of her birthmark and her suffering. Though on separate missions, Arden and Dan come to respect each other's quest for freedom, for the touch of simple kindness in a world grown cruel. Thrown together by circumstance, bound by a loyalty stranger than love. A loyalty stranger than love. I love that. They set off on a journey of relentless suspense and impassioned discovery, an odyssey over dark, twisting roads and waterways into the beautiful and mysterious depths of the human heart. Now, that that tells you what's going on, and it tells you the heart of the story, and it kind of gives you a glimpse into the darkness of the story. But how it kind of just landed on the two bounty hunters for a second. They really are two of the most memorable characters that I've ever seen in a story. But basically, yeah, Dan Lambert is the victim of what he called the Silver Rain in Vietnam, where they put Agent Orange on the trees as I think it's called a defoliant, and they said that, you know, whatever there was a plant that was alive would die under it, and somehow they were supposed to be fine. They said they could take a shower in it and rub it in their armpits and on their face and everything else, they'd be fine. And I've seen some of the victims of Agent Orange, even their wives, started to show effects after a little while. And Dan Lambert knows that he's going to die. He actually thinks that he's only got a few months or maybe even a little more than a year to live. So when he goes to this place where all of the skilled men with no jobs go to wait for people to kind of take a sort of mercy on him and give them working jobs, he has to sacrifice his pride to do it, even though he knows that he gave it all for the country that won't even give him a second glance. And basically, he needs his truck to do any sort of job if he were to get one. Here's a pen if you need one. He's eating a pen over here, and I think that that's actually the one. There was a pen that the tip of it came off, but yeah. I guess I should have warned someone. But basically, his truck is about to get repossessed. So this man who's teetering on the brink of leukemia and the ravages of a country that hates him is about to lose his only means of making money and trying to be something for his son who's with an estranged wife. And they go away because he has a flashback of killing in a war that he didn't begin, and all of a sudden he finds himself with his hands around his son's throat.
Josh DeForge and JJ Wolf on Insta.
Oh, okay. All right, sorry, I had trouble reading it, but yeah, we got some Instagram followers tonight. But anyhow, what? Sorry. Oh, it's okay. I'm not good at the prompts yet, but I get in my zone. It's difficult to it's difficult to get this stuff to break in, but I'm knocking stuff over. But so anyway, he goes into the bank and he basically says, you know, please, sir, if you could help me out. And it turns out that the bank manager has changed in the last time that he's been in there, and a brand new bank manager has come in that won't be helping out some poor Vietnam veteran, even though he owes him $1,500 or whatever it is. And it comes down to a showdown in the manager's office, and and that's another one of those things where it doesn't have to be fabricated. You can totally imagine this scenario if you've ever had to ask someone for something and swallow your pride and totally step on your beliefs to try to just squeeze out some little bit of human kindness so you can just make it through another week. And push comes to shove, he looks around and he sees that the bank manager's got all sorts of I support the armed forces and American flags all over everything, and he explains to the guy what happened to him and that he's got leukemia from different things he was exposed to, and the guy won't be having it. And the next thing you know, a man's dead. So Dan Lambert has to go on the run. But one of the things that really, I mean, it grabs you by the heart and by the brain, and just, you know what's happening. You felt what's happening to this character, this man. It goes beyond a character. I totally recognize this guy. Everything that happened to him, I'd seen before, and it wasn't so familiar that I didn't feel a pang of suspense and disgust, and I felt sick to my stomach when, and I had read this before, when it all comes down, and he has to make a break for it, fruitlessly, because he really doesn't have anything to lose. He ends up in the South Country, and he comes across a church. He ends up having to hide in the church, and he meets the pastor, and the pastor actually brings him home for dinner, fried chicken dinner. So there's nothing that really seems too far-fetched. And even when you get to the most, like I said, when they said the most memorable characters, I can't think of anything I agree with more, because Flint Murtaugh is this gambler and also a bounty hunter, and he's just hard. Like, Flint is a perfect name. He's hard enough to strike sparks on steel. It's such a wonderful character, because he at one point he wins in this game of cards, and someone follows him out into the alley to get their money back, and he taps his belt buckle, and all of a sudden you see this, or in your mind's eye, just from reading it, you see this scrawny little albino arm with a hand at the end of it come out from between the buttons of his shirt, and probably his bolo tie and all this stuff, with a little 2-shot Derringer, and points it straight at the guy as he's got, Flint Murtaugh's got his both hands up, and he's at the mercy of this guy who wants his money back. And all of a sudden, this thing from some sort of freak show ends up rearing a Derringer out from his chest and points it at the guy. So you find out that he's got a conjoined twin brother named Clint that is kind of half grown into his chest and part of his belly from birth, but he just kind of feeds him Ritz crackers, and he uses them as like this blind during card games. So Clint will like feed him aces and stuff. It's fantastic, especially when you see the story of Dan Lambert. You think that this fantastical, kind of gruesome but weird and kind of on the fringe type of character would take you out of it, but it doesn't. So I think that's just like a testament to especially, I mean, that's not even the half of it. Then we meet his boss, which is kind of this like this real slimy boss hog, like kingpin type character, who says, there's a reward for Dan Lambert. I think it's like 10 grand or something from the bank. So he ends up sending Flint, but he says that he needs to kind of sharpen up a new guy. And it turns out the new guy is this guy named Pelvis Isley, who's a Elvis impersonator. But somehow he's got this gift of gab where he can talk to someone, and then the next thing you know, you're like giving away all your secrets to this guy. So they're two of the strangest bedfellows you could possibly think of, and they've been sent to hunt this very, very simple wronged man across the bayous of Louisiana. And that's all I'm gonna say about it, because it's wonderful. It is so much fun, and but yet at the same time, it's got so much heart and so much grit. At the same time, there doesn't have to be any fake action. There doesn't have to be any fake drama or fake horror. Just even in something as simple as you meet this little trailer court type of motel proprietor, and it's this little man with a stutter, and then all of a sudden, he's got this hulking wife that just has his heart in her hand, and you recognize everything. You recognize all of it, even the stuff that totally gives you fits of revulsion. You get all of it, and it doesn't take as much time. and as much prodding and as much machination, as much puppet mastering as Stephen King does. So that's it. That's all I'm going to say about Gone South. Find it wherever you can. I was able to find it at the library. Sometimes, I get so many things. I mean, look behind me. I just got so many things that sometimes I can't find some of the books I'm looking for. So I end up going to my local library, which you should definitely do. There are more there than computers. Believe me. Yes, that's right, punk. There are things called books there. Libros. But yeah, check it out. Definitely read anything by Robert R. McCammon you can get a hold of. Mine, which I've never read, but it looks totally terrifying. Mystery Walk. I think it's Usher's Passing, which is kind of a sequel to the Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. But it's a novel form. They Thirst, They Thirst is kind of a look into the 90s. It's a vampire novel, and it kind of it takes place directly after The Lost Boys would. So you get a definite taste of the 90s, and maybe Poppy Z. Bright was taking a look at that when she wrote her stuff. But anything by him. I think he had a 2-part book called Speaks the Nightbird that came out not too long ago. I haven't read that one yet, but definitely check out anything by him. He's got some short stories as well, and there's one called Night Crawlers about another Vietnam vet that goes into a diner, and it turns out that he's got a little bit to say about the fabric of reality. So definitely Robert R. McCammon, Gone South, anything by him, totally read it. I recommend it wholeheartedly. If you don't like it, I'll pay for it. So there you go. That's all I can say about that. The second one for tonight is even more colorful than the first. It's Donnybrook by Frank Bill, who actually, as far as I know, he's probably not there now just due to his recent, I don't know if I want to say stardom, but he's definitely gotten popular. He ended up writing a Crow series, and he wrote, I don't know if it's considered a sequel to Donnybrook or if it's kind of in the same world, called The Savage, and that it's been difficult to find. I've been really wanting to read it. And he actually wrote one called Crimes in Southeastern Indiana. Everything you see, like we're in the place for this. Every location that he's got in his books, I've seen or driven through at some point. He talks about the Ohio River and the bends in the river, and parts of Kentucky and Southeastern Indiana, and I recognize all of it. And there's nothing that seems fantastical about any of it, especially since considering what goes on in these books. Some people will kind of liken them to Chuck Palahniuk, but I guess that the part with Chuck Palahniuk, I think they might be tacking that on there just because this book has a Fight Club element to it, and I'm not so sure that I agree, except maybe in the placement of names, kind of like the weaving of the cutting of these intertextual stories and things, because I'm going to read the cover description and summary of this. I think I'm going to do that first, actually, because it's really something else. I told these guys that if they didn't want to read either of these books, I would really be surprised, because it's really something. I had to buy a second copy because the first copy that I had been so beaten up from me reading it just endlessly that I had to pick up another copy. So here is the explanation of Donnybrook by Frank Bill. The Donnybrook is a 3-day bare-knuckle tournament held in a 1,000-acre plot out in the sticks of southern Indiana. 20 fighters, 1 wire fence ring. Fight until only one man is left standing, while a rowdy festival of onlookers, drunk and high on whatever's on offer, bets on the fighters. It kind of also reminds you of Every Which Way You Can, and Every Which Way But Loose. Actually, there was bare-knuckle fighting in both of those. Jarhead is a desperate man who'd do just about anything to feed his children. He's also the toughest fighter in Kentucky, and he's convinced that his ticket to a better life is the one fight with a cash prize so big it'll solve all of his problems. Meanwhile, there's Chainsaw Angus, an undefeated bare-knuckle beast who isn't too keen on getting his face punched anymore. So he and his sister Liz have started cooking meth. And they get in deep. So deep that Liz wants it all for herself. One more showdown to take place at the Donnybrook. As we travel through the backwoods on our way to Donnybrook, we join a cast of characters driven to all sorts of evil in the name of getting their fix. Drugs, violence, sex, money, honor, as they converge on their last shot to make things right. Donnybrook is exactly the fearless, explosive, amphetamine-fueled journey you'd expect from Frank Bill's first novel, and then some. Now, that is a total distillation of everything that's in this book, and it doesn't even begin to explain everything that happens. You see that and you think, this is going to be a straightforward story. Which it is. I mean, everything that the explanation has said is true. It does happen, but it leaves out so much. There are characters in this book that you've seen before, you've known before, you've brushed shoulders with before. In every little convenience store you've ever been to, in every swap meet, and everything down at the Lawrenceburg Speedway, anything at some party out in the backwoods, any field party you've ever been to, any barn dance, anything. You've met every single one of these people because they're us. They really are us. I mean, it sounds like in the description that they're all a bunch of degenerates, which we all are degenerates, that they're all scumbags, which we're all scumbags, white trash, bottom of the barrel types. And I think that would be a disservice if you were to call them types. Definitely in this book, there are real people. And there are fantastically crazy situations that we see every day on the news. We hear about them all the time. And in fact, there's a bounty hunter in this book as well named Fu. He, I can't recall off the top of my head. I think that he may have been the interest in some place that had gotten robbed. But basically, Jarhead Earl is the name of the lead character. And it starts right in with a robbery. He walks into the local gun shop in this small Kentucky town. And something interesting morally happens. He actually pulls a shotgun on the owner, because he knows that the owner doesn't have a gun under the counter, because he thinks, the whole place is full of guns. Who possibly would be stupid enough to try to rob the gun shop? And it turns out that Jarhead Earl is just that stupid, and he needs to feed Zeke, Z-E-E-K, and Caleb, his twin sons. So, but there's also, there's a ulterior motive. He wants to get to Donnybrook so he can show his stuff and unseat Chainsaw Angus from Supremacy, which is kind of like I was talking about the Every Which Way But Loose. I think that guy's name was Bull or something like that. I can't remember, but it's kind of the same type of drive to be the best, but at the same time, get paid and get paid doing the dirty stuff. And that's definitely what he's going for. But like I said, with the moral component, when he goes in to rob the guy just starts putting piles of money out in front of him, and he says, no, stop right there. And the guy says, like, what are you talking about? He says, I only need $1,000. So it's kind of like, I don't know if you guys have seen Payback with that crazy anti-Semite Mel Gibson in it. There's an element to that in that as well, and that was actually based on a Richard Stark book, which was totally hard-bitten, hard case crime novels and things like that, who Stephen King based his George Stark character in The Dark Half after, which was based off of his pseudonym, Richard Bachman. So there's a thread of familiarity and a really hard-bitten vein throughout this entire story. But there's so many characters that weren't even mentioned on the back. Chainsaw's okay, I almost gave something away there, but his sister Liz, she is totally totally as cold and as calculating as they come. And there are all these side characters, but it sounds like a simple story when you read the back, and when you dive in, you realize that it's a simple story, all right, but only at the end. All of the threads and all of the lives that intertwine to make this insane, explosive ending on this book. It takes the time somehow. I think this is like 242 pages, something like that. Somehow there managed to be so many little subplots that end up working towards a whole. The Donnybrook ends up being the focus of the end of the book, and you wonder how all these people, these characters, manage to to fit together in this ending, and it's really something. It is a complete gut punch of a book. There's no doubt about it. I mean, that's I guess that sounds like a pun, but there's no pun intended. There's so many things in this book that that take you by surprise, but it shouldn't, because everything's leading up to this in this book. There's nothing that doesn't make sense towards some kind of ending of everyone. You see, if someone... That's one thing that Frank Bill is good at doing, especially in Crimes of Southeastern Indiana. I've got that book as well, and that's all short stories, but they all seem to be connected somehow. There's this universe that he lives in, and usually, is just under some trailer somewhere or is rolled off the street in some rural road. There's nothing that you haven't seen before, but I'm not so sure that you would be able to, consider it at home with some of the locations and some of the predicaments that these people get in at the same time. It's not that any one thing is really unfamiliar or out of place. It's just that you can't believe that somehow he's able to lattice them all together into this coherent novel, which it is. It's completely coherent. You know everything that's going on at any one time, and it just amazes me that it was masterful enough so that you wouldn't be wondering what each character was all the time, because there are a lot of characters that take front and center in this book because they just come into view. All of a sudden, you don't see Jarhead Earl anymore. You see Liz, and you see Chainsaw, and you see Fu, and a total galaxy of other characters that are in this book. You see them uncovered, and all of a sudden, the person that you are rooting for ends up being the person that you're rooting against. And that was kind of where I was going with these two picks for tonight. Was one is a book about someone who's trying to completely run away from who he is and what he's done, and the other one is running headlong towards it and the outcome of his plans, which are completely dire. But yeah, so that's all I'm going to say about Donnybrook as well, because to give any more away would totally take the glint and the edge off of this book. But it's not easy to find. You'll probably have to go online to find it. I had to search all over the place for a secondary copy of this book. So as far as I know, it's nowhere in any library around here. But hopefully with all of the people that are watching this right now, the teeming millions of you, talk to your library, tell them to get Frank Bill whenever you can, and if they don't have Robert McCammon, which they should, tell them to stock the shelves, because it's all worth it. So, yeah, there you go. Robert McCammon, Gone South. Definitely read everything that he's got to offer, the entire catalog. You will not be sorry. There isn't a blah moment. There isn't a sighing voice in any of his work. And Donnybrook, the secondary novel, I'm not sure if it's a direct sequel. I think that some characters... I hesitate to say a shared universe, because I'm really starting to hate that term, but I guess it's the easiest thing to say. I think that there are characters that float throughout the Crimes of Southeastern Indiana and into Donnybrook and into the newest, I think it's the newest one, called The Savage. And I think that there's definitely something to be said for him landing Farrar, Straus and Giroux. I think that's the way you say it. A very prestigious publishing house puts out his stuff, even though there's a picture of somebody getting their face smashed on the front of it. So there's something to be said for that. I guess they may have been looking for the next Jack London or Steinbeck. So, and they may have found it. I mean, it's a different time now, which means it's not that so different at all. So if you want violence, if you want craziness, if you want the lowest underbelly of things that you see every day, check out Donnybrook by Frank Bill. And I think that's about it for Diabolical Index for April 23rd. It's good to be back. Sorry about last week. I'm sure it's going to happen again at some point, but I have to say I was kind of sad to break my record. I think that I was doing pretty well there.
You were the only one.
I was the only one. And now I'm a failure. So this is the last. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I can't give it up. There's just too many things to do. No, I'm actually not quite sure. I mean, I guess next time, I guess it's going to be my mob. Like if we want to take up the Lone Wolf again, because there's so much to it. There was so much to it. I looked through the Lone Wolf book after we were done that day, and I realized there were 1,000 different permutations. But it did seem like we were spending a lot of time in that one town, and it was starting to irritate me a little bit. But we'll see. I might come up with something different. In fact, I found a few Choose Your Own Adventures in the last couple of weeks. So I might actually put it to a vote about which one's going to be featured in the non-entry episode next week. Nothing should get in the way. I don't think anything should get in the way. If anything does get in the way, I'll see if I can't let you know beforehand and maybe do some sort of a promo or what have you. I don't know. Because, I mean, Cinematic Realities is going full bore, and I got, a couple of the crew here. You never know. They might be in the midst of something and can't break free. But if that happens, I got a couple of lo-fi, low-rent versions I can do for my phone or what have you. Some Polaroids. I'll just kind of like take a bunch of Polaroids and then like flip them to make the zoetrope or whatever. But there you go. I can't even stop my own podcast. Okay. That's been Diabolical Index, where the pages of the uncanny reside, beware human heart. And as always, keep it squirrely.
The squirrel was magic!